By Sin I Rise, Part 1. Sins of the Fathers, Book 1. Written by Cora Reilly. Narrated by Win Ross and Kai Kennicott.
Prologue. Marcella. Some things run in your blood. They can't be shaken, can't be changed, can't be lost, but they can be forgotten. From an early age, I had a foolproof instinct when it came to danger or sniffing out a person who couldn't be trusted. And I listened. Always paused before I acted to glimpse deep inside of me for that gut feeling, to double check. Until I stopped listening. Until I got used to others taking care of my safety. Until I trusted their judgment over time. I handed over my life to others, to capable bodyguards, to men who were so much more equipped to protect me than I, a mere girl and later woman, was. If I had listened to my gut feeling, to the tingling at the back of my neck that first night, and later when they took me, I would have been safe. But I'd learned to be deaf to my inner voice, to an instinct inherited by my father, because I was meant to be oblivious to the dangers of our life. Little children quickly learn that closing your eyes from evil doesn't protect you. It took me far too long to grasp that lesson.
Maddox. From the very first moment I spotted Snow White, she'd burned herself into my brain. Every fucking night, the image of her naked body tortured me in maddening detail. Sometimes, I woke with the remnants of her taste in my mouth, half convinced I'd actually buried my tongue in her undoubtedly pretty pussy. Fuck. I hadn't seen an inch of that legendary body yet, much less touched her. Oh, but I would, even if it took a poisoned apple. A guy like me would never be allowed near Snow White. I wasn't a fucking loser. Far from it. I was going to become the president of the Tartarus MC, following in my uncle's footsteps, the current prez. Of course, that made me the lowest scum on earth if you ask Snow White and her fucking father, Luca Vitiello, the Capo of the Italian mob on the East Coast. I was a little boy, barely 5 years old when the life I knew was ripped from me. As the son of the president of the New Jersey chapter of the Tartarus Motorcycle Club, I had watched many disturbing things at my young age. Club brothers getting it on with whores in the middle of the clubhouse in broad daylight, brutal fights, shootings. But nothing had left quite a mark like the night the Capo of the Familia brutally killed my father and his men. The murderous bastard had slaughtered an entire chapter of our club, alone. Strike that. Not alone. With a fucking axe and a skinning knife. The screams of my dying club family still haunted my nights. An echo of a memory I couldn't shake unless I drank enough booze to kill an elephant. Those images were the fuel for my hunger for revenge. And revenge I would finally get, with the help of the spoiled princess of New York, Marcella Vitiello. Chapter 1. Maddox. 5 years old. I huddled on the floor of the clubhouse and spun an empty beer bottle around. My palms were sticky from it. When I brought my fingers to my mouth for a taste, my lips pulled into a grimace. A bitter, rotten flavor exploded on my tongue, clinging to my gums and throat. I spit it out, but the foul taste didn't disappear. The room was filled with smoke from the cigars and cigarettes, making my nose itch a little, and sometimes my snot even had dots of black in it. I kept spinning the bottle. I didn't have any other toys here. My toys were all with Mom, But Dad had picked me up there yesterday, and they had screamed at each other like they always did. Dad had slapped Mom, creating a red handprint on her cheek, and he'd been in a foul mood ever since. I always stayed out of his way when he was like that. Right now, he was yelling at someone on the phone. Pop, his second in command, usually played games with me, but he sat at the bar with a blonde woman and was kissing her. The other bikers huddled around the table and played cards. They didn't really want me to annoy them. One of them had pushed me away, so I fell on my bum when I'd asked if I could watch them. My tailbone still ached where it hit the floor. Steps thundered closer. The door to the clubhouse swung open and one of the prospects stumbled inside, eyes wide. "Black limousine." Everyone jumped up as if the words were a secret code. My head swiveled to Dad, who barked out orders, spittle flying from his mouth. I didn't understand what was so bad about a black car. A cry sounded, high-pitched, then gurgling. I looked back to the door, and the prospect fell forward, an axe in the back of his head parted like a ripe watermelon. I dropped the bottle, my eyes going wide. The body fell to the ground, and blood splattered everywhere as the axe toppled out of his head, leaving a deep gash in his skull, so I could see bits and pieces of his brain. Just like a watermelon, I thought again. Dad rushed over to me and grabbed my arm in a painful grip. "Hide under the couch and don't come out. You hear me?" "Yes, sir." He shoved me toward the old gray couch, and I dropped to my knees and crawled under it. It had been a while since I'd tried to squeeze under the couch, and I barely fit anymore. But eventually I lay on my belly, facing the entrance door in the room. A huge man with wild eyes stormed inside, a knife and an axe in his hand. I held my breath as he came in with a roar like a mad bear. He hurled his knife at Dad's treasurer, who'd reached for his gun. Too late. He fell forward right before the sofa. His huge eyes stared at me as blood pooled under his head. I scooted back a few inches but froze abruptly, worried my feet would stick out. The screaming got louder and louder until I pressed my palms over my ears, trying to block them out. But I couldn't look away from what was going on. The madman had grabbed his knife and threw it at Pop. He hit him square in the chest, and Dad toppled backward as if he'd had one too many drinks. Dad dashed behind the bar with two prospects. I wanted to hide there with him, wanted him to console me even if that wasn't something he did. The madman shot another club brother in the hand when he reached for a dropped gun. I could hear shots even through the palms over my ears, dulled bangs that had me flinch every time. The madman kept shooting at the bar, but eventually, everything turned silent. Had Dad and the prospects run out of ammunition? My eyes moved to the armory at the end of the corridor. One of the prospects jumped out from behind the bar, but the man chased him and swung the axe at his back. I squeezed my eyes shut, taking a few shuddering breaths before I dared to open them again. The blood of the treasurer slowly spread closer and began to soak my sleeves, but this time, I didn't dare move. Not even when it soaked my clothes and covered my small fingers. Two more of Dad's men came in, trying to help, but this madman was like an angry bear. I was motionless as I listened to screams of agony and rage as I watched one dead body after the other drop to the ground. There was so much blood everywhere. Dad cried out as the man dragged him out from behind the bar. I lurched forward, wanting to help him, but his eyes cut to me and warned me to stay where I was. The bad man's eyes followed Dad's gaze. His face was like that of a monster, covered in blood and twisted with rage. I ducked my head, terrified that he'd seen me, but he kept dragging Dad toward a chair. I knew better than to disobey my father's orders, and so I remained motionless for what felt like days, but were probably only minutes. The bad man began hurting Dad and the prospect who was still alive. I couldn't watch anymore, and so I closed my eyes so tightly my temples throbbed. I pressed my forehead to my arms. My chest and arms were warm with blood, and my pants were warm where I'd peed myself. Everything stank of pee and blood, and I held my breath, but my chest hurt, and so I had to suck in a breath. I started counting the seconds, tried to think of ice cream and fried bacon and Mom's key lime pie, but the screams were too loud. They pushed all the memories out of my head. Eventually, silence settled around me, and I dared lifting my head. My eyes watered as I looked around. There was red pooled and splattered everywhere with pieces of flesh. I shuddered and threw up, bile making my throat feel all raw, then froze. Terrified the bad man was around to kill me as well. I didn't want to die. I began to cry, but quickly wiped the tears away. Dad hated tears. For a while, I listened to the pounding of my heart that rang in my ears and vibrated in my bones, until I felt calmer and my vision became clear. Finally, I looked around for the man, but he was nowhere. The front door was open, yet I still waited a long time before I finally crawled out from under the sofa. Despite my clothes being dirtied with pee and blood, and my body screaming for food and water, I didn't leave. I stood in the middle of the torn-apart bodies of men I'd known all my life, men who had been the closest thing to a normal family I'd ever had. I hardly recognized any of them. They were too disfigured. Dad's body was the worst. I didn't recognize his face. Only his tattoo on his neck, a skull spitting fire, told me it was him. I wanted to say goodbye to him, but I didn't dare go closer to what was left of his body. He looked terrifying. I finally stormed outside and didn't stop running until I reached the house of an old lady. She was the treasurer's property. I had visited her a few times before when she'd baked cookies for me. When she saw me covered in blood, she immediately knew something was horribly wrong. "They are dead," I whispered. "All dead." She tried to call the phone of her old man, then that of Dad and other brothers from the club, but no one answered. Eventually, she called my mother for me and cleaned me while I waited to be picked up. When Mom finally arrived, she looked white as a sheet. "Come on, we have to leave." She took my hand. "What about Dad?" "We can't do anything for him anymore. New York isn't safe for us anymore. We have to leave, Maddox, and we can't ever come back." She dragged me toward our old Ford Mustang and sat me down in the passenger seat. The car was stuffed so high with bags that I couldn't look through the rear window. "Are we leaving?" I asked, confused. She turned the key in the ignition. "Didn't you listen? We have to leave forever. This isn't Tartarus territory anymore. We're going to live with your uncle in Texas now. It'll be your new home." My mother immediately called my Uncle Earl, asking for help. She didn't have any money, which Dad had always given her, even though they always fought and didn't live together anymore. Earl took us in, and so we moved to Texas. And eventually Mom became Earl's old lady, and they had my brother Gray. Texas became my temporary home, but my heart always called to return to my birthplace, to claim my birthright and seek revenge. I didn't return to New Jersey for many years, but when I finally did, it was with one purpose in mind: kill Luca Vitiello.
Marcella, 5 years old. I perched on the edge of my bed, my legs bouncing up and down. My gaze was glued to the door, waiting for it to open. It was already 7. Mom always woke me at that time. The clock turned to 7:01, and I began to slide off the bed. Would Mom be late today? I couldn't wait anymore. The door handle moved down, and I froze, sitting back on the mattress and watched as Mom poked her head in. Upon spotting me, her face lit up and she laughed. "How long have you been awake?" I shrugged and hopped off the bed. Mom met me halfway and hugged me tightly. "Happy birthday, honey." I squirmed in her hold, desperate to go downstairs. Pulling away, I asked, "Can we go down now? Is there a party?" Mom laughed again. "Not yet, Marcy. The party is later today. Right now it's only us. Come now. Let's look at your presents." After a brief moment of disappointment, I took Mom's hand and followed her downstairs. I wore my favorite frilly pink nightgown, which made me feel like a princess. Dad waited in the foyer when we walked down the stairs and picked me up before I reached the last step and kissed my cheek. "Happy birthday, princess." He lifted me up over his head and carried me into the living room. It was decorated with pink and blush-colored balloons, a garland that said happy birthday, and a golden crown sat on the table beside a huge pink cake with a unicorn. On another table, a big pile of presents waited, all wrapped in pink and gold wrapping paper. I rushed toward it. "Happy birthday!" Amo screamed as he raced around the table trying to steal the show. "They're from us, and your aunts and uncle," Mom said. But I only half listened as I began unwrapping everything eagerly. I got almost everything I asked for. Almost. Dad stroked my head. "You'll get more presents at the party today." I nodded and smiled. "I'll be the princess." "You always are." Mom gave Dad a look I didn't understand. A few hours later, the house was filled with friends and family and men who worked for Dad. Everyone had come to celebrate with me. I wore a princess dress and a crown, loving how everyone brought me presents and congratulated me and sang happy birthday for me. The present tower was 3 times my size. Late that night, when my eyes kept falling shut, Dad carried me up into my room. "We need to put on your nightgown," he murmured, as he put me down on my bed. I held on to his neck and shook my head vigorously. "No, I want to wear my princess dress and my crown," I added after a yawn. Dad chuckled. "You can wear the gown, but the crown is too uncomfortable." He gently took it off and put it down on my nightstand. "Am I still a princess without a crown?" "You'll always be my princess, Marcy." I smiled. "Cuddle me to sleep?" Dad nodded and awkwardly stretched out beside me, his legs dangling off the too-short bed. He wrapped an arm around me and I leaned my cheek against his chest, closing my eyes. My dad was the best dad in the world. "I love you, Dad. I won't ever leave you. I'll live with you and Mom forever." Dad kissed my temple. "And I love you, princess." Chapter 2. Marcella. The soft swinging of the hammock lulled me into a half-slumber as I watched the frothy waves lap at our jetty and beach. The hammock in our mansion in the Hamptons was my favorite place on a sunny day. And there had been weeks of sunny, hot summer days since the beginning of June. But I hadn't had much time for leisure. I wiggled my toes, releasing a sigh. The last few days had been tiring, and so a few days to relax were sorely needed. The organization of my 19th birthday party had meant weeks of intense preparation with cake and menu tasting, clothes shopping, guest list correction, and many more tasks. Even an event planner had hardly reduced my workload. Everything needed to be perfect. My birthdays were always one of the most important social events of the year. After the big party 2 days ago, Mom had taken me and my younger brothers Amo and Valerio to the Hamptons for a week of much-needed relaxation. Of course, Valerio didn't understand the meaning of relaxation. He was out on the waves, water skiing, while one of our bodyguards steered the boat in risky maneuvers to satisfy him. I doubt I ever had as much energy as that kid. Not even at 8. Mom read a book on a lounge chair in the shade, her blonde hair framing her face in messy beach waves. My hair was always straight. Even a day at the beach didn't change that. Of course, my hair was coal black, and not angelic blonde like Mom's. Black as your soul, Amo tended to joke. My eyes cut to him. He had set up a CrossFit parkour in a less needed part of our property, and was doing the workout of the day. It looked like self-inflicted torture judging from his expression. I preferred Aunt Gianna's Pilates courses. Of course, Amo's dedication let him look like Hulk at age 15. The sliding door opened and our maid Laura stepped out with a tray. I swung my legs out of the hammock and smiled when I saw she had prepared our favorite strawberry fresca. That drink cooled me down even on the hottest summer days. She poured me a glass and handed it to me. "Thanks," I said, shivering in satisfaction as I sipped at it. She put down a bowl with iced pineapple pieces on the side table. "The pineapple isn't as good as last time." I popped a piece into my mouth. It was a bit too tart. I sighed. It's so difficult to get good produce. Amo jogged over to us, sweat flying everywhere from his glistening upper body. "Don't get sweat on my food," I warned. He made a show of shaking himself like a wet dog, and I jumped up from the hammock, taking a few steps back to save my fresca. Sibling love only went so far. He ate a few of my pineapple pieces, not even apologetic about it. "Why don't you get your own?" I motioned at Laura, who was currently serving Mom her fresca and fruit. He nodded at the book of marketing analytics on the side table. "It's summer. Do you really have to take homework with you? You're best in class anyway." "I'm best in class because I take my homework with me," I muttered. "Everyone's waiting for me to slip. I won't give them the satisfaction." Amo shrugged. "I don't get why you care. You can't always be perfect, Marcy. They'll always find something they don't like about you. Even if you organize the birthday party of the century, someone's still going to complain that the scallops weren't glassy." I tensed. I told the chef several times to take extra care with the scallops because... I trailed off when I saw Amo's grin. He was pulling my leg. "Idiot! Just chill, for God's sake." "I am chill," I said. Amo gave me a look that said I was most definitely not a chilled person. "So were the scallops glassy or not?" Amo groaned. They were perfect. Don't get your panties in a bunch. And you know what? Most people will still not like you even if the scallops were out of this world." "I don't want them to like me," I said firmly. "I want them to respect me." Amo shrugged. "They do. You're a Vitiello." He jogged after Laura to get his hands on more pineapple and fresca. For him, the discussion was over. Amo was going to be Capo, and yet he didn't feel the pressure as I did. As the oldest Vitiello and a girl, expectations were sky high. I could only fail. I had to be beautiful and morally impeccable, pure as the snow, but at the same time progressive enough to represent the new generation of the Familia. Amo got bad grades, slept around, and went out in sweat, and everyone just said he was a boy and would grow out of it. If I ever did either of those things, I'd be socially dead. My phone beeped with a message from Giovanni. "I miss you. If I didn't have so much work, I'd come over." My fingers hovered over my screen, but then I pulled back. I was glad that his internship in the law firm of our familiar lawyer Francesco kept him busy. I needed a few days away from him after our almost argument on my birthday. If I didn't manage to get rid of my annoyance before our official engagement party, I'd have trouble keeping up a puppy love expression. I turned the sound off and put my phone screen down on the table and grabbed my book. I was immersed in a particularly dragging part when a shadow fell over me. I looked up to find Dad towering over me. He had stayed in New York for urgent business with the Bratva. "Hard-working as always, my princess," he said, and bent down to kiss the crown of my head. "How is business?" I asked curiously, putting the book down. Dad smiled tightly. "Nothing for you to worry about. We have everything under control." I gritted my teeth against the desire to question him. His gaze sought Amo, who immediately stopped his workout and came over to us. Dad had wanted him to be present for whatever went down with the Bratva, but Mom had talked him out of it. She couldn't stop protecting him. "Hey, Dad," Amo said. "Did you have fun smashing Bratva heads in?" "Amo," Dad's voice swung with warning. "Marcy isn't blind. She knows what's going on." I sometimes thought that I understood the brutality of Dad's job better than Amo did. He still considered it great fun and didn't really see the danger. Mom was probably right to keep him away from the big fights. He'd only get himself killed. "I need to talk to you. Come down on the boat with me," Dad told Amo. Amo nodded. "Let me grab a sandwich. I'm starving." He jogged back to the house, probably to pester Laura to make him a grilled cheese sandwich. Dad's face was tight with anger. He obviously wanted to talk right away. He thinks the conflicts with Tartarus and the Bratva are great fun. Like another level in one of his computer games. Ugh. He needs to grow up, Dad said. His eyes snapped to me as if he'd forgotten I was there. I shrugged. He's 15. He'll eventually grow up and realize the responsibility. I wish he was as responsible and sensible as you are. Being a girl helps with that, I said with a smile. But it also meant my responsibility and sensibility would never be of use to me. I could never be a part of the business. Dad nodded, his face becoming protective. Don't worry about any of this, Princess. You have enough on your plate with college and your engagement and wedding party planning. He trailed off as if he was at a loss what else I did in my free time. Dad and I didn't have many common interests. Not because I wasn't interested in familiar business, but because he didn't want me involved. He tried to show interest in the things he thought I liked instead, and I pretended to like them. The engagement party is already planned, and there's still plenty of time until the wedding. Our engagement party was scheduled in 2 weeks, even though we'd been engaged for almost 2 years. But the wedding was still another 2 years away. A meticulously planned future lay ahead of me. I know you love it if things are perfect. He touched my cheek. Will Giovanni come over? No, I said. He's too busy. Dad's brows pulled tight. I can call Francesco and tell him to give Giovanni a couple of days off if you want. No. Dad's eyes tightened with suspicion. He didn't do anything, Dad, I said firmly. I just want a bit of me time to study and to think about the color scheme for the party. I lied and smiled broadly, as if I couldn't think of a better way to spend the afternoon than to mull over the difference between cream and eggshell. I hadn't even begun to plan anything for the wedding, and didn't feel compelled in the slightest to do so right now. After a few days of relaxation after the birthday party planning, I'd probably feel more enthusiastic. Amo came out of the house with a plate stacked with 3 sandwiches, while already stuffing his face with a 4th. If I ate like that, I could kiss my thigh gap goodbye. Dad kissed the top of my head again before he and Amo headed down to the jetty to discuss familiar business. I sighed and picked up my book, immersing myself in the pages. Dad wanted to protect me from our world, and I had to accept it.
Maddox. Do you know what this is about? Gunnar asked as he pulled up beside my Harley. I swung off and ran a hand through my tangled hair. It was the shortest I'd ever worn it, only long on top so I could brush it back, but the helmet still made a mess out of it. Earl didn't say anything to me. Gunnar got off his bike, an older model with plenty of chrome. My bike was an all-black fat boy. Even the spokes were matte black. The only dash of color was the small Tartarus MC script stitched into the leather seat in blood red and the hellhound beside it. Gunnar looked around. "Where's the kid?" "Probably lost in pussy somewhere," I said with a grin as we headed toward the clubhouse. It was the fourth home base we'd had in the last 2 years. Vitiello and his men kept sniffing them out, so we had to abandon them frequently. There wouldn't be another massacre. We settled around the oak table where Earl was already waiting, lounging in his fucking massage chair. We had to lug the heavy thing from one clubhouse to the next. Earl had an expression as if he'd won the fucking Nobel Prize. More and more brothers settled around the table until every member with a vote had gathered, except for one. Earl shook his head, got up and removed the vacant chair from the table and moved it into a corner of the room. Then he settled back into his own chair, ready to begin the meeting. The door flung open and Gray staggered in, his fly open and his cut put on the wrong way. His long blonde hair was in complete disarray. I stifled a smile. This boy had a lot of growing up to do. Earl's face darkened, accentuating the many scars even more. Even though he shared Gray's and my hair color, his had turned gray over the years. "You're late." Gray seemed to grow smaller as he stumbled toward his usual spot at the table, freezing when he realized his chair was gone. He looked around, finally spotting it in the corner. He went to pick up the chair. "You can sit in the corner until you learn to be on time, boy," Earl barked. Gray gave him a disbelieving look, but Earl sure as fuck wasn't joking, judging by the pissed-off gleam in his eyes. "Sit down or leave," he ordered. "Then put your fucking cut on right, you idiot, or fuck off from this meeting." Gray glanced down at himself, his eyes widening. He awkwardly pulled his cut off and turned it inside out, then put it back on before he sat down in the corner. "Done? I don't have all day. We have matters to discuss." Gray nodded, then sunk deeper into his chair. I gave him a wink and relaxed against the upholstered headrest of my chair. Earl had a carpenter make the heavy mahogany chairs with the red padding to give our meeting table a royal look. Even his massage chair was upholstered with the red satin. Of course, after Earl himself had managed to get the first burn mark from his cigarette into the expensive satin, things had only gone downhill. Gray still hunched in his chair like a drowned dog. He always took Earl's reprimands to heart. Maybe it was his age, but I hadn't been this eager for Earl's approval when I was 17. Yet, Earl had always given it to me more freely than to his son. But even I had hardly ever received a warm word. I'd learned at an early age to find warm words with women, and not my club brothers, much less my uncle. "So what's going on, Prez?" Cody asked. Earl's disapproval was replaced by a sly smile. "I've come up with the perfect plan to kick Vitiello's ass." "Hear, hear," I said. "What did your pretty head come up with?" "We're going to kidnap Marcella Vitiello." "His daughter?" Gray quipped. His open shock reflected my own feelings. Only I had learned to keep them to myself. I'd later talk to Earl in private about my concerns. Earl sent him a harsh look. "Who else? Or do you know anyone else with that fucking name? You'd think God didn't grace you with more than 2 brain cells the way you sometimes act." Gray's neck turned red, a clear sign of his embarrassment. "You think Luca Vitiello gives a rat's ass if we kidnap his spawn? She's not his heir. Maybe we should kidnap that giant boy of his," Cody said. He was Earl's sergeant-at-arms, and royally pissed because I was the second in command and not him. He'd eat the hair right off our fucking heads, I muttered, which earned me laughter from everyone around, except for Cody, and Gray, who was still nursing his hurt pride. I want you to vet her, Maddox. You're going to lead the operation, Earl said. I nodded. This was personal. I would have insisted on being part of the job even if my uncle hadn't asked me to do it. The spoiled Vitiello princess would be mine. Earl shoved a newspaper article over to me. The headline announced the engagement of Marcella Vitiello with some slick asshole. My eyes were drawn to the image below. Fuck, I muttered. That's her. Several men let out low whistles. Earl leered. The whore who will cost Vitiello his fortune and laugh. They must have used some kind of filter. Nobody's this goddamn gorgeous, Gunner said. I think my dick would fall off in awe if it ever got near that pussy. Don't worry, it won't, I said with a wink. Your old lady would probably chop it off before you got close. Gunner touched his heart. He'd been the treasurer of our club for a decade now, and often acted more like a father figure than Earl. The photo was manipulated, no doubt, another brother said. I could only agree. Vitiello had probably paid extra so the photographers retouched his daughter's image until she looked like an apparition. Long black hair, pale skin, sky blue eyes, and full red lips. The asshole beside her in his button-down shirt and carefully combed dark hair looked like her tax consultant and not the one who made her cream. Like Snow White, I whispered. What? Earl asked. I shook my head, dragging my eyes away from the photo. Nothing. Sounding like a fucking imbecile wouldn't do me any favors. I assume she's heavily guarded. Of course. Vitiello keeps his wife and daughter in a golden cage. It's your job to find the loophole, Mad. If anyone can do it, then it's you. I nodded distractedly as I scanned the photos on the table once more. Risky maneuvers were my specialty, but I had grown more cautious over the years. I wasn't a teen anymore. At 25, I realized that getting killed before I got my revenge wouldn't do the trick. My eyes drifted back to the photo as if pulled by an invisible string. Too fucking gorgeous to be true. Vitiello had been the center of my attention, never his family, and definitely not his children. For some reason, it annoyed the fuck out of me that he'd managed to father such a stunning daughter. I really hoped the photos were heavily retouched, and Marcella fucking Vitiello was butt ugly in real life. I wore civil when I followed Marcella the first time. Her bodyguards would only get suspicious if a guy on a bike showed up repeatedly. Vitiello had certainly given out the headshots of every known member of our club to his soldiers, so they could kill us on sight. Luckily, I'd laid low in the last few years and lost the boyish features and shoulder-length hair of my teenage years. Those wild years that had almost cost me my life and gotten me the nickname Mad. Right after returning to New York, I'd run one attack after the other on familia establishments until a bullet grazed my head and almost ended my life. I'd die once Vitiello got what he deserved, not a day sooner. Today, I even wore a goddamn long-sleeved turtleneck to cover up my tattoos and scars. I looked like a fucking mother-in-law's delight. But even looking like that, I made sure to keep my distance. Marcella's bodyguards were as cautious as could be expected from soldiers who'd have to answer to Luca Vitiello if something happened to his precious offspring. Worse than my choice of clothes was the Toyota Prius that Earl had organized for me to pursue our target, I missed my bike. The vibrations between my thighs, the sound, the wind. Riding in this car, I felt like an idiot. But my camouflage gave me the chance to trail Marcella's car closely. And when they finally came to a stop in front of a fancy boutique, I parked a few cars away. I got out of my Prius just when one of the bodyguards held open the back door for Marcella. The first thing I saw of her was a long, lean leg and red high heels. Even the goddamn sole was red. When she straightened, I had to suppress a curse. This girl didn't need a filter. She wore a red summer dress that accentuated her narrow waist and round butt, and made her legs look miles long, even though she was a petite woman. I forced myself to keep checking the shop displays because I'd frozen in my tracks upon spotting the Vitiello princess. Her gait spoke of unwavering confidence. She never once swayed despite her ridiculously high heels. She walked the streets as if she owned them, her head held high, her expression cold and painfully beautiful. There were girls that were pretty. There were girls that were beautiful. And then, there were girls that had men and women alike stop in their tracks to admire them slack-jawed. Marcella was the latter. When she disappeared in the boutique, I shook my head as if I was trying to wake from her spell. I needed to focus. Marcella's looks were completely irrelevant to our mission. The only thing that mattered was Vitiello's insane protectiveness. If we had her in our hands, we owned him. And then the bastard would pay. I breathed a sigh of relief when I peeled out of the fucking turtleneck after returning to the clubhouse that night. Only in boxers, I went down to the bar area and grabbed myself a beer. Mary Lou came out of Gray's room when I opened my door. She wore hot pants and a tank without a bra. Her face lit up when she spotted me. "You look like you need company." I took a swig from my beer. I needed a female body to distract me from Marcella Vitiello. And I suppose you want to be that company? She sauntered over to me and raked her nails down my bare chest, tugging at my nipple piercing as she did so. She leaned up as if to kiss me. "Did you just give Gray a blowy with that mouth?" I asked with a smirk. She flushed. "He passed out drunk before he—" "I don't want to know if my brother shot his load down your throat, Lou," I muttered, then I opened my door wide. "No kissing, but I'm in the mood for a blowy, and I promise not to pass out before shooting my cum down that pretty throat of yours." She giggled when I clapped her ass and closed the door after us. Lou was one of our pass-around girls, but she had every ambition to become an old lady. Not mine. That was for sure, though. I woke in the middle of the night from a dream, or maybe a nightmare, depending on the viewpoint. The last remnants of it still swirled around in my head. Blue eyes peering down at me, red lips parted for a cry of ecstasy and a pussy over my mouth. My eyes opened wide. Fuck. I could almost taste it. Dreaming of eating out Marcella Vitiello was the last fucking thing I should do. A warm body stirred beside mine, and for a fucking heartbeat I wondered if I'd somehow managed to forget kidnapping Marcella and took her into my bed. "Mad?" came Lou's drowsy voice, and my heartbeat slowed again. "Go back to sleep," I said gruffly. My cock pulsed with excess blood. The last time I woke with a raging hard-on like that, I had been a teenager. Lou curled toward me, her hand brushing my dick. "Want me to suck you off?" Yes, shit. But I'd only imagine it was Marcella. That would take things down a very dangerous road. "No, go back to sleep. Her breathing evened out within minutes, and I kept staring at the ceiling, ignoring my throbbing dick. I should have known Luca Vitiello's spawn would make my life hell, even before she was in our hands. Her father had haunted my nightmares for years. It was only fitting that now his daughter took over.
Chapter 3. Marcella. I checked my reflection one last time. Everything was perfect. At exactly 4 p.m, the doorbell rang. Giovanni was never late. He wasn't even early. He was always on point. In the beginning, I'd found his desire to please me, and especially my dad, adorable. Now I had to stifle my annoyance as he stepped into the foyer after our maid Laura had let him in. He wore a perfectly ironed dress shirt and pants, and his hair was in place despite the storm raging outside. I headed down the staircase to greet him. When I stood on my tiptoes to kiss his lips, he quickly dodged me and kissed my palm. Slanting a cautious look at Laura, who pointedly looked anywhere but at us. I gave him a look, no longer trying to mask my annoyance. Giovanni, my father isn't home, and even if he were, he knows we're a couple. We're engaged, for heaven's sake. I could see that my words weren't making the slightest impact on him. His fear of my father was too great. This wasn't news, and not even particularly shocking. Giovanni gave me one of his pleading smiles, which always looked a little on the verge of being painful. He took my hand. "Let's go up to my room," I said, linking our hands. Giovanni hesitated. "Shouldn't I greet your mother first?" That was his miserable attempt to gauge if my mother was home. "She's not home either," I quipped, losing my patience. He finally followed me upstairs, but I could still feel his worry lingering, and it eventually came through when we reached the first-floor landing. "What about your brother? He's the master of the house when your father isn't home." "My brother's in his room, probably playing Fortnite or whatever else he's into at the moment. He doesn't care if you say hi to him." "But maybe we should alert him of my presence." I was starting to lose my patience. Narrowing my eyes, I said, "He knows you're here, and he doesn't care. I'm the oldest Vitiello present. But you're a woman." He didn't have to say it. Only a woman, and thus completely irrelevant. I stifled a new wave of frustration. "It's not like you're a stranger, Giovanni. You're my frigging fiancé." Giovanni hated it when I cursed. He thought it was unladylike and not fitting for a capo's daughter, which was exactly why I used it to annoy him. He obviously had no problem annoying me with his fear of being alone with me. We finally settled on my bed after yet another argument if we should leave the door of my room ajar. I could tell Giovanni wasn't into our kiss. His tongue was like a lifeless snail in my mouth. Kissing him had never really set my blood on fire, but this topped it off. He seemed miles away. I got up with a seductive smile and pulled my dress over my head, presenting the new La Perla bra and panty set I'd bought only last week in the hopes that someone other than myself would see it. They were black lace, revealing the hint of my nipples. Giovanni's eyes widened as they raked over me, and hope burst through me. Maybe we were actually getting somewhere. I crept back into the bed, and I could already see the trepidation take over Giovanni's expression as if I was going to force myself on him. I kissed him and tried to pull him down on me, but he pushed up on his arms, levitating over me, a pained expression on his face. I felt heat rise into my cheeks at his rejection. I wasn't even sure why I still felt this way when his pulling back had become a painful routine. Giovanni shook his head. "I can't, Marcella. Your father would kill me if he found out." "But my father isn't here," I growled. And yet, he was. My father was always in the room when I was alone with Giovanni. Not physically. He didn't have to be because he was in Giovanni's head. Everyone was terrified of my father, even my fiancé. My father's shadow followed wherever I went. I loved my family more than anything, but in moments like this, I wished I wasn't Marcella Vitiello. Even though my father allowed me to date, by merely existing he enforced the old traditions I technically wasn't bound to anymore. I was still expected to remain a virgin until my wedding night. But whatever else Giovanni and I did was our problem. Of course it would be, if Giovanni had the balls to touch me. I shoved Giovanni away and he gave in, leaning back and sinking against the headboard. He looked as if he would have jumped right off the bed if he wasn't scared of offending me. Scared to offend me, scared of my father, always scared. What's your problem? We've been dating for over 2 years and you still haven't gotten anywhere near my panties. I couldn't believe I was having this argument. I couldn't believe I was practically begging my fiancé to get it on. Whenever my friends talked about how they manipulated their boyfriends with sex, I felt a pang because Giovanni would probably cry in relief if I stopped pestering him with having sex. I felt undesired. I didn't even dare talk to my friends about this, and instead pretended I was the one who wanted to wait until marriage like the good, virtuous Capo daughter everyone wanted me to be. Marcy, Giovanni began in a tone that suggested I was a little girl in need of reprimanding. You know how things are. Oh, I knew. This wasn't about society. This was about his fear of Dad. I was done with this. Done being desired from afar. I can't do this anymore. 3 people is one too many in a relationship. I grabbed my dress and dragged it angrily over my head, not caring when I heard it rip. It had cost a fortune, but I could buy a new one. I could have anything money could buy, and even things beyond that. If my father pulled the right strings, everyone treated me like a princess. The spoiled princess of New York. I knew the nickname carried in nasty whispers through our circles. Good for nothing but shoe shopping and being pretty. I excelled at both, of course, but I was also best in class and had goals in life that would never matter. I never, Giovanni said, shocked as he scrambled after me. Cheat? No, you didn't. Part of me wished he had. Then I could drop him and pay him back. Get revenge that could keep me busy, but as it was, his confused expression made me feel guilty. My father has always been and will always be a part of this relationship. He'll cast his shadow over our marriage too. I'm sick of it. Do you want to marry him or me? Giovanni stared at me as if I'd grown a second head. It drove me crazy. This wasn't his fault. It was mine for never being happy with what I had. For wanting a love that burned so bright it would burst right through Dad's shadow. Maybe that love didn't exist. But I wasn't ready to swallow that bitter pill of acceptance yet. Listen, Marcy, calm down. You know I worship the ground you walk on. I adore you, honor you. I'll be the best husband I can be for you. He worshipped me like an unattainable princess. Every kiss, every touch was drenched with care, with respect, with fear. Fear of what my father would do if Giovanni displeased me or him. I hated it. In the beginning, his gentleness and restraint had been endearing. He'd known he was my first kiss, and it had taken him 3 months to kiss me. I had to force the kiss on him. Every other step in our physical relationship had been initiated by me as well, and there hadn't been many to count. Sometimes I felt as if I was forcing myself on him. I, who had guys almost break their necks to check me out. If I went somewhere nobody knew me, then I could have a new guy every night, but I didn't want to run. I didn't want to hide who I was, who my father was. I wanted someone who wanted me badly enough to risk my father's wrath. Giovanni wasn't that person. I'd realized it a long time ago but had clung to this relationship. Had even said yes to his marriage proposal. When even back then, I'd known he wasn't going to give me what I wanted. 2 years, 3 months, and 4 days. Another day wouldn't be added to our relationship. 10 days after our engagement, everything was over. I could already see the uproar this news would cause. It's over, Giovanni. I'm sorry. I just can't do this anymore. I turned and hurried away, but Giovanni followed me. Marcy, you don't mean it. Your father will be furious. I whirled on him. My father? What about you? What about me? I shoved him away and stormed off. Giovanni's steps rang out behind me and he caught up with me on the staircase. His fingers closed around my wrist. Marcella. His voice was low, frantic. You can't do this. We're supposed to marry once you graduate. In 2 years, I'll have my marketing degree. The mere idea to continue our relationship in the same way for that long made my stomach churn. I couldn't do it anymore. Giovanni shook his head. Marcy, come on. We can marry sooner if you want. Then we can do whatever you want. Whatever I wanted. A new wave of undesirable feeling washed over me. I'm sorry that it is such a burden for you to get physical with me. It's not. Of course not. I desire you. You are a beautiful woman, and I can't wait to make love to you. He kissed my hand, but I didn't feel anything. And the idea of making love to Giovanni actually seemed less appealing than it ever had before. Giovanni's eyes begged me to reconsider. But I clung to my resolve even as I felt guilty. It would only get worse if I ended it later. And I would end it eventually. I shook my head. Giovanni's grip on my wrist tightened. It wasn't painful yet, but close. He leaned closer. You know of our traditions. The familia is still conservative. If you don't marry me after dating me for 2 years, you'll lose your honor. We didn't do anything except for kissing and a few boob squeezes, and one crotch brush I forced onto you. But people will think we did. I couldn't believe his audacity. Is that a threat? I hissed, ready to smack him. He quickly shook his head. No, of course not. I'm just concerned about your reputation, that's all. How considerate of him. Amo slept with half of New York. If the conservatives want to tear into someone for their sexual practices, they should choose him. He's a man. You're going to be ruined. Bite me. I paused. Oh, I almost forgot that you can't. You'd probably shit your pants from fear of my father. So go away. I tried to jerk free of his grip, but he didn't let go. He hadn't done half the things I wanted to, because Giovanni hadn't wanted to risk it. And now he dared to blackmail me with everything we didn't do but might have done? Asshole. Something shifted down in the living room and Amo got up from the sofa where he'd apparently been busy with his phone and slowly came our way. I narrowed my eyes at Giovanni. Let me go right this second or I swear you're going to regret it. His eyes darted to the doorway where my brother was towering with a murderous look. Giovanni released me as if he'd been burned. I have to go, he said quickly. I'll call you tomorrow when you've had time to calm down. My eyes widened in fury. Don't you dare. We're done. Amo came closer. You're leaving now. Giovanni turned and stalked toward the front door. Amo followed him and threw the door shut. Then he stalked toward me. I stood on the last step and he was still taller than me. His eyes burned with protectiveness. What happened? Do you want me to go after him and kill him? When other brothers said those words to their sisters in a fit of protectiveness, it was a figure of speech. Amo was deadly serious. If I said the words, he'd go after my ex-fiancé and end his life. Giovanni had pissed me off, but he could find his happily ever after with someone else as far as I was concerned. Did he force you to do anything you didn't want to do? Of course he'd think that was the case. No one would believe I had to beg a man to touch me. No, I pressed out, feeling a treacherous heaviness in my throat and eyes. Giovanni is Dad's perfect lapdog, the restrained gentleman. Amo gave me a look that made it clear he worried for my sanity. If a girl was lying half naked in front of you, would you tell her no? Amo's lips tightened in discomfort. Probably not. But I really don't want to imagine you naked or having sex. If Dad knew, he'd kill Giovanni just because. Why? Giovanni was a well-trained lapdog and didn't dishonor me. I gritted my teeth against the hot feeling in my eyeballs. I wasn't going to cry because of Giovanni. For a while, I'd been sure I loved him, but now I realized I'd wanted to love him. Had loved the idea of loving him. My relief over having put an end to this was too great for real love. Yet, sadness also settled deep inside of me. Sadness over wasted time or a future that was lost, I wasn't sure. I had thought I could force love, could recreate what Mom and Dad had by sheer force of will, but I'd failed. I need to think, I said, and turned on my heel to head to my room. Amo was a great brother, but talking relationships with him was moot. The moment I stepped into my room, my eyes settled on the frame on my bedside table. It held a photo of Giovanni and me at our engagement party. Giovanni was beaming, but my face seemed off. I'd never noticed it before. But I didn't look like a woman in love with her fiancé. I looked like a woman doing her duty. I walked over to my bedside and turned the frame over. Staring at this photo wouldn't help me clear my head. I felt a little lost as I stood in my room. Every moment that I hadn't spent with my family working out or on college had been dedicated to Giovanni. Now that was over. It wasn't easy finding someone to trust, to love, to be with, if you were me. I'd known Giovanni for a long time, and he'd been part of my life since childhood. As the son of one of Dad's captains, we always attended the same social events. I didn't want to think about it. Grabbing my iPad, I cozied up in the nook in my wide window and clicked on my favorite shopping sites. But even that didn't do the trick. So I grabbed my purse and headed down to the bodyguard offices in the adjacent building to tell them I wanted to go shopping. 2 hours later, I returned home with a dozen bags. I dropped them unceremoniously on the floor. Now that the shopping rush was over, a familiar emptiness spread in my chest. Shoving the sensation down, I grabbed the bags closest to me and opened them. I put on the Max Mara dress, then pulled the shoebox out of the other bag. Steps rang out, and Amo appeared. He didn't say anything for several moments as he stood with his arms crossed in the doorway, muscles bulging. I raised my eyebrows. When other girls get dumped, they cry their eyes out. You spend a fortune on clothes. My chest tightened. I had almost cried, but I'd jabbed myself in the eye with my stilettos before I'd let that happen. I didn't get dumped, I said, slipping my new black leather Louboutins on. Girls like me don't get dumped. Giovanni would have never dumped me. The problem was I wasn't entirely sure if the reason for that was his fear of my father or his adoration of me. I tried to recall our good moments, but looking back, none of them held the emotional depth I'd longed for. I could still kill him, you know. It wouldn't be any trouble. Amo was trying to be like Dad, but he wasn't pulling it off. Not yet. I straightened, then turned around to show off my new dress to Amo. What do you think? He gave a shrug, but his eyes remained worried. Looks good. Good? I asked. I want to look hot. Amo cocked an eyebrow. You know fucking well how you look, and I won't call my sister hot. I want to go out dancing. Amo shook his head. Mom's gonna kill me if I fuck up another math test. Amo had failed math last year, and only Dad's reputation had saved him. Now Mom forced him to do math tests even in the summer. Rolling my eyes, I walked up to him and tilted my head back. "Really? You choose math over partying?" Amo sighed. "Are any of your friends going to be there?" "Half of them hate you because you dumped them, and the other half has the hots for you, so I'm keeping you the hell away from them. Not to mention that none of them knew of my breakup yet, and for now I had no intention of changing that." "Then I'm out." I made a pleading face. "Please, Amo, you know I'm only allowed to party when you're with me. I need a distraction." Amo closed his eyes, growling. "Fuck. I really don't know how Giovanni could say no to you when you made that face." I flashed him a smile, knowing I had won. He, like Dad, had trouble saying no to me. He was too busy worrying about all the ways Dad was going to kill him. Amo chuckled as he took out his phone, probably to ask the bodyguards for approval. "Yeah." The smile dropped. "You sure you're okay?" He didn't budge. "I'm fine." I tossed my hair back. "Now let's show New York's male population what they're never going to get." "You're so fucking vain," says Mr. Vanity. "When are you going to tell Mom and Dad?" I paused. That was a conversation I wasn't looking forward to. Not because I worried they'd force me to reconsider my decision, but I didn't want to explain my reasons to them, and they'd certainly ask for an explanation. Our circles would also certainly ask questions, and if I didn't give satisfactory answers, they'd start spreading rumors. They'd probably do it anyway. People were looking for a scandal, especially where I was concerned. I had more enemies than supporters. Tomorrow night, when they're back, Mom and Dad had their weekly date night, which they spent in a hotel. Valerio was with Aunt Gianna and Uncle Matteo in the meantime, probably getting up to no good with our cousin Isabella, and Amo and I had the house to ourselves, and the bodyguards. "Did we get the go-ahead from the bodyguards?" Amo nodded, looking up from his phone. "We can go to one of the familiar clubs." That's what I'd expected. Amo and I had only once set foot inside a Bratva club, and Dad had completely lost his shit. "Then let's get ready. I want a distraction." The club was frequented by many people from our circles, so Amo and I were under scrutiny the second we entered. We both were used to it, so we ignored the constant attention. Or at least pretended to do so. From an early age, every one of our steps had been monitored, and so we'd learned to keep up appearances in public. No meltdowns or smudged makeup. Too often paparazzi trailed us. I didn't want that kind of photo of me in the newspaper. It would make my family look bad. Amo and I made our way toward one of the private balconies overlooking the dance floor. Because Dad owned the place, nobody cared if we were old enough to drink, and we weren't bound to the minimum beverage requirement of $1,000 for the evening. But most of the time, Amo and I easily topped that with our friends. Now that we were alone, this wouldn't happen. Drinking a Magnum bottle of Dom Perignon alone or with your little brother after a breakup was too sad. I checked my phone again. I'd asked Maribel and Constance, my two closest friends from college, if they wanted to join us. But they'd already made other plans because this was supposed to be my date night with Giovanni. I ignored their questions why I was suddenly free to spend the night with them and turned off my phone. I just wanted to forget what had happened and who I was for a few moments. But seeing all the judgmental gazes on me, at least the latter wouldn't happen. Keeping my head high, I showed my perfect, spoiled princess face, giving them what they expected. They hated me because they thought I had everything when the things I wanted most were always out of my reach. Money could buy so many things, but never happiness or love. Heck, I couldn't even choose the job I wanted. Dad would never allow me to be part of the business. To do what I was born to do and follow the path that ran in my blood, I tossed my hair over my shoulder and ordered a bottle of champagne. My life was filled with all the riches money could buy, and other girls hated me for it. I wondered if they'd still hate me if they knew of the invisible shackles around my wrists. Sometimes I just wanted to break free of them. But for me to do that, I'd have to leave the life I knew behind. And worse, my family.
Chapter 4. Maddox. I spent forever grooming into a slick version of myself that would fulfill the entry requirements of the dance club. Earl was wary of me following Marcella inside one of Vitiello's clubs, concerned about the danger, or probably just about our plan being detected. But hiding right under the enemy's nose was one of the best places to be. Luca would never expect a member of the Tartarus MC to set foot inside one of his establishments. The asshole was too sure of himself. To guarantee my success, I'd chosen Mary Lou to accompany me. She could clean up pretty well and pretend she belonged in a fancy Manhattan dance club. Guys with a female companion usually had it easier to access dance clubs. "Take my hand," I said as we joined the line, and Mary Lou did at once, looking as if I'd given her the greatest gift of all. It certainly didn't hurt that I'd given her a few $100 to go clothes shopping so she'd look like a Manhattan chick. When we reached one of the huge baboons Vitiello had picked as bouncers, he gave me the once-over, then checked out Mary Lou and motioned for us to go inside. Mary Lou clung tightly to my hand as we made our way into the club. This wasn't my usual crowd, nor the music I enjoyed. The monotone beat and the crowd spasming in rhythm with it made me want to hit a sledgehammer to my temple. I quickly scanned the club, but it didn't take me long to spot my target. She and her brother throned high above the mundane crowd on their VIP balcony, overlooking their subjects like the king and queen of New York that they thought they were. "Let's dance," Mary Lou shouted. I gave her a look. We were here on business, not for fun. "We need to blend in," she reminded me, as if she gave a fuck about our mission. Not that she knew exactly why we were here. Earl didn't trust the club girls to keep their mouths shut. But she had a point. We needed to blend in. As usual, the Vitiellos had an entourage of bodyguards surrounding them. Blending in wasn't their style. The bodyguard on the staircase leading up to the balcony gave me a quick once-over, but his face didn't show any recognition. With the stiff dress shirt and slicked-back hair, I looked too much like one of those Wall Street brokers that frequented Vitiello's clubs to blow cocaine up their noses. I danced with Mary Lou, but my gaze kept darting up to the VIP balcony. Unfortunately, the angle wasn't the best, so I could barely make out Marcella Vitiello. The main reason why I knew she was up there were the many curious stares from the people on the dance floor. "Let's go to the bar," I shouted, growing tired of dancing. "I'm going to the restroom," Mary Lou said, and I nodded absent-mindedly because Marcella was heading toward the staircase leading down to the main floor. Several people craned their heads to watch the spoiled princess of New York as she glided down the stairs in a boner-inducing dress. My eyes were glued to her as she headed for the dance floor through the parting crowd. She wore heels that had my head spinning. High and pointy, but she danced in them as if they were sneakers. Every move, every toss of her hair, even every bat of her lashes was in perfect sync with the music, as if she'd spent months perfecting a choreography. Marcella Vitiello was pure perfection. She knew it, and everyone around her better acknowledge it. And I despised her for it. She lived a spoiled life, bare of hardships. She'd never suffered the way I had. Her father had put her on a throne, made her a princess without any achievements of her own. Hard work, pain, sacrifice meant nothing to the Princess of New York. Her fall would be steep. Fuck. I'd make her fall flat on her arrogant nose. I let my gaze wander around the crowded club. Apart from her brother, a kid whose resemblance to his father made me want to slash his throat, she had 3 bodyguards with her. For once, her lapdog of a fiancé wasn't at her side. Trouble in paradise? I smiled against my beer bottle and took another swig. I should leave. Even in disguise, the risk of being recognized by one of the Familia soldiers was too high. It would ruin everything, but tearing myself away was hard. I stayed where I was for a couple more minutes and watched her dance. That girl didn't need bodyguards or her giant of a brother to keep everyone at a distance. Her gaze with those soul-suckingly cold blue eyes built higher walls than the Chinese emperors. Another toss of those black tresses, and suddenly, those blue orbs locked on mine. For less than a second, but my pulse sped up. Fuck it. The only time I'd felt this arrested by a gaze had been her father's, but in a very different way. The tables would soon turn. I smiled. Her brows puckered and I tore my gaze away. After leaving the bottle and cash on the bar, I found Mary Lou and exited the club with her. "What's gotten into you, Matt? You look as if the devil's after you," Mary Lou said as she stumbled after me in her heels, displaying none of the grace that Marcella showed off with ease. I got into the fucking Prius Earl had forced on me again and waited for Mary Lou to get in as well before I hit the gas. "Let's go back to the clubhouse. I've had enough." She gave me a curious look, but I focused on the street and occasionally the rearview mirror as we hastened away. Marcella Vitiello had eyes that could freeze the blood in anyone's veins, while the rest of her body had the opposite effect. That night was the second time I dreamed of her, and from that day on, she'd haunt my nights.
Marcella. Usually dancing always worked wonders on my mood. It was my personal happy place, the medicine of my choice when I felt blue, but today it didn't have the intended effect. I preferred things to go my way, to follow the plans I laid out meticulously for my future. So far, all of my plans had worked out. I'd finished high school best in class, and had made it to the university of my choice. When I started something, I always finished it. And when I finished it, then I did it as one of the best. Breaking up with Giovanni, even if it was the right choice, felt like a failure. Like admitting defeat on my part. I'd given up. "Why are you pulling such a face? I thought we were here to have fun," Amo shouted over the sound of the music. My eyes sought the club for something to catch my attention and distract me from my wandering thoughts. And then I spotted the guy who seemed completely out of place in this fancy Manhattan club, despite the standard outfit of dress shirt and dress slacks. Something in his eyes told me he despised everything about being here, as if he had to pretend he was someone else. I knew that feeling. But no one would ever suspect anything. I'd perfected my mask over the years. Maybe he would too, eventually. Or just stop doing what he hated. He leaned against the bar, a bottle of beer in one hand. My gut instinct told me he didn't care for anyone's approval, which made his choice of outfit even stranger. He probably wouldn't give a damn if my father got mad. I wished I could be like that. Not giving a damn about what people thought of me. But that was a luxury I couldn't afford. Pretty much the only one. The guy met my gaze and his smile around the bottle rim became almost smug. My skin began to tingle in a treacherous way, a sign of impending danger. But my bodyguards looked unperturbed, so I ignored my body's reaction to the guy. But I couldn't stop looking into his eyes. Something in them raised goosebumps all over my body. Many people disliked me, but his feelings toward me seemed darker and deeper. He turned abruptly and disappeared into the dancing crowd like a ghost. Sometimes I wished I could do the same, just vanish into the shadows, into anonymity for a little while. I glanced at my bodyguards once more, but they hadn't even paid attention to the guy. And Amo? He was dancing with two girls at least 5 years older than him who looked ready to tear his clothes off. I rolled my eyes at him as I kept dancing on my own. The usual band mile around me. Men didn't approach me for fear of my father, and girls kept their distance so they could badmouth me. Amo waved at the two girls and danced his way over to me. "You don't have to keep me company like I'm some loser," I muttered. But I was glad for his presence, which said a lot about my day and my life in general. Having to rely on your younger brother to dance with you was sad in every regard. Amo shrugged. "You're the only person I can be myself with, loser or not." I rolled my eyes again, but my throat clogged with emotions. "Shut up and dance." It was almost 2 a.m. when Amo and I dragged our tired asses back home. Despite the 3 champagne cocktails I'd had throughout the evening, I felt disappointedly sober once I settled in my bed. All thoughts of Giovanni and my now frustratingly unplanned future returned, full force. I remembered the guy who disappeared into the shadows, and how in that moment I'd wished to do the same. But I wasn't someone who ran off. Even if this life often sucked, I was too grateful to my parents for what they'd done for me. Despite my insistence to Amo that I wasn't nervous about talking to Mom and Dad, my stomach tightened as I made my way downstairs in the morning. I could already hear Mom and Dad talking, the occasional clinking of cutlery. When I stepped into the kitchen, they both looked up. Mom smiled brightly, looking as if she and Dad were fresh off their honeymoon. "How was date night?" I asked unnecessarily. "Wonderful as always," Mom said, giving Dad one of those secretive smiles. His face was always filled with so much tenderness that I realized why it could have never worked out with Giovanni. I was striving for what Mom and Dad had. But while Giovanni worshipped the ground I walked on because of who I was, of who my father was, he never looked at me as if he'd walk through fire for me. Dad wouldn't have let anyone tell him how to love Mom. He definitely wouldn't have been scared of her father. "Marcella?" Dad asked, worry tinging his voice and his dark brows pulling together. Steps sounded behind me and Amo trudged in sweatpants and nothing else, looking like death warmed over and squinting against the sunshine. The 5 o'clock shadow on his cheeks and chin still threw me off, even though his facial hair had been growing for a while. In case Mom and Dad hadn't known about our dance party yet, they would now. Amo gave the barest hint of a nod as he plopped down on a chair with a groan. Dad's expression became stern. "What did I tell you about getting drunk?" "I expect you to study for your math tests, even if you have a headache," Mom added. "It was my fault," I said, because Amo didn't look as if he was in a state to defend himself, and it wasn't fair that he'd gotten into trouble because of me. Dad leaned back in his chair with an expectant look. "I broke up with Giovanni," I pressed out. Mom's eyes widened, and she jumped up at once and hurried over to me. "Oh, Marcy, I'm so sorry. What happened?" She touched my cheek. I was about an inch taller than Mom, but she still managed to make me feel surrounded by her comfort. Dad, however, looked as if he was about ready to hunt Giovanni down. "What happened?" His words, even if they were the same as Mom's, held a very different meaning. I could see that he was already imagining all the horrible things Giovanni might have done to upset me, and how to make him pay tenfold for his transgression. "What did he do?" "Nothing," I said firmly. That was the problem. I couldn't tell Dad the exact reasons why I had broken up with Giovanni, especially because they were the reasons why Dad probably would have chosen him. They were most definitely the reasons why Dad had allowed me to date Giovanni in the first place. Dad could read people, and he'd probably smelled from a mile away that Giovanni was too cowardly to ever touch me. Dad looked at Amo as if he hoped my brother would prove my words wrong, but Amo only shrugged as if he didn't have the slightest clue and would rather die than suffer another moment of his hangover. Mom's eyes softened further. Maybe you and Giovanni can fix it? No, I said immediately. If I returned to Giovanni, that would only happen out of habit, and because I hated the prospect of an uncertain future. But those weren't good enough reasons to continue a relationship. I just realized I didn't love him. I don't want to settle for less than what you have. Mom smiled softly. Sometimes love takes time. Your father and I weren't in love when we married. I know. You didn't even choose to marry, but it didn't take you years to love each other. Giovanni and I have been together for more than 2 years, but I don't love him. And I never have. Dad finally rose from the chair as well. There must have been an event that made you realize this. There wasn't, Dad. Honestly. I've realized it a while ago, but I didn't want to give up too quickly. Especially knowing that it might reflect badly on you and Mom if I break off the relationship and, worse, our engagement. The familia is still stuck in the Middle Ages in some regards. Mom nodded, but Dad still eyed me as if he expected me to give him a more satisfying answer to his question. I'm going to have a word with Giovanni. My eyes widened in alarm, and Mom warned, Luca, that's Marcella's decision. It's her decision, but I should still talk to Giovanni and see what he has to say. In his defense, you mean? I added angrily. I loved my dad and his protectiveness, but sometimes it went too far. It's my job to make sure you don't get harmed. I lost it. But you were the reason why it didn't work out in the first place. If you want to find an answer to your question, then you have to look in the mirror. Watch your tone, Dad said firmly, then he frowned. Now explain. I supported your relationship with Giovanni, didn't I? He asked, turning to Mom. After your initial resentments, you were in favor of the relationship, yes, Mom said neutrally. Amo stifled a grin, but I was far from being amused. You were in favor of Giovanni because of how easily you could control him. He was always eager for your approval. You could be sure he'd never do anything you didn't want. I don't see a problem. Of course you don't. But what I want should matter in a relationship and not your wishes. I am who I am, Marcella. My reputation carries even beyond our circles. Few men have the bravery to disregard my wishes. That's something you'll have to accept. I'm giving you more freedoms than most girls have, far more freedoms than your mother ever had. But you'll always be bound by certain rules. I guess then I'll just have to find someone who has the balls to stand up to you. I gritted out. Language, Mom said. I shook my head and stalked off. Breakfast isn't finished, Dad reminded me, but I ignored him. I headed straight for my room and flung myself on my bed, letting out a frustrated cry. Who would have the guts to go against Dad's wishes? Giovanni and all the other familia soldiers even tried to anticipate Dad's unvoiced wishes. A man like that would never make me happy. But the normal guys I met in college were even worse. They barely glanced my way because they worried my dad would chase them Al Capone style. They didn't know any real facts about the familia, but even their imagination was bad enough to keep them at arm's length. If they really knew what Dad was capable of, they'd run away crying. No, I could never respect a man like that. I stared up at the ceiling blankly. Maybe someone from another mob family? But I had absolutely no intention to move to the West Coast, nor to become a part of the Camorra. They were too crazy for my taste. And someone from the outfit? I might as well just put a bullet in Dad's heart. I guess I'd have to stay single indefinitely. A soft knock sounded and Mom came in. Can I talk to you? I nodded and sat up. I didn't want to mope around on the bed like a 5-year-old. Mom perched on the mattress beside me and gave me an understanding smile. She was always understanding. I suppose she'd learned that behavior in her marriage with Dad. Are you okay? Yes, I said. I wasn't sad about losing Giovanni. Not really. I'm just sad I didn't end things sooner. Mom tilted her head. Is there anything you want to tell me that you couldn't say in front of your dad? I laughed. Giovanni didn't do anything, so I don't have to protect him. Dad would probably give him accolades for being such a perfect gentleman. Mom bit her lip, obviously fighting amusement. Go ahead. Laugh. I feel like a laughingstock anyway. I muttered. Is it so wrong to want it all? Love, passion, and someone that Dad likes, or at least tolerates? Maybe things would improve after your wedding. I shook my head. Giovanni will always try to please Dad with everything he does. I suppose that's true. You were so lucky that you got Dad. He's the one that everyone fears. He'd never try to please anyone. He takes what he wants. I didn't see it that way at first. I was terrified of your father. Love and passion required some work on both parts. No matter how hard I try, I can't imagine you being scared of Dad. You're like yin and yang. You complement each other. Someday you'll find that special someone. Where? Where you least expect it.
Chapter 5. Maddox. Gunnar and I waited in the van, smoke filling the inside. Since we'd left the clubhouse, I had smoked pretty much nonstop. Today was the day. I had to admit I was nervous like a virgin before her cherry got popped. We'd been trailing Marcella for weeks now, waiting for the perfect moment to abduct her. Unfortunately, the safety measures Vitiello had put in place for her were almost impenetrable. Earl was losing patience, but a risky maneuver would only alert Vitiello and not get us anywhere. Maybe this was our only chance. I wouldn't mess up. Maybe she left through another door, Gunnar said. His shoulder-length gray hair had fallen almost completely out of his ponytail because of his constant fretting. I'd never seen him so nervous. Nah, I said. The cars are still here. Let me check the area. I hopped out of the van and squashed my cigarette under my boot before I strolled along the pavement. I felt naked without my cut, but wearing anything that linked me to Tartarus would have been stupid and pretty much suicide. Even in civilian clothes, the risk of being spotted by one of Marcella's bodyguards was still high, but I could feel it in my blood that today was the day. Eventually, I spotted the spoiled princess. She talked to an older man in loafers and a mustard yellow suit coat, probably a professor. I hadn't even finished high school, so I didn't have much experience with these things. But he looked like someone who spent too much time with his nose in books. Her bodyguards kept a respectful distance, but were still too close for us to grab her. We had enough ammo and guns to conquer the entire college, but we wanted to keep things as low-key as possible. We didn't want the police on our backs. Having Vitiello and the Familia lighting fire under our asses was more than enough. Not to mention that Vitiello paid half the cops, so they'd probably hand us right over to him, and then we'd be pulp. I trailed Marcella at a safe distance on campus. I'd even grabbed a couple of books in the library to look my part. She studied business and marketing, or pretended to do so. I bet her daddy bought her degree for her. Not that she needed a college education. She'd marry that sappy fiancé and become a trophy wife like all the mob women. I hadn't seen Marcella and her boy toy together in over a week, which was unusual, but today he trailed her again like a lost puppy. He didn't know much about women if he couldn't see how annoyed she was by his simpering begging. But his whining eventually worked, and she followed him to his car for a conversation. Of course, the posh boy had a fancy Mercedes cabriolet. The Familia just swam in money. She ordered her bodyguards away, and they stayed back at the stairs to the main building. I straightened and grabbed my phone to send Gunnar a text. Keeping an eye on Marcella and her boy toy, I jogged over to the old van and got into the passenger seat, where I dropped the books on the floorboard. Slowly, Gunnar steered the car toward the parking lot where Marcella and her fiancé seemed caught in an argument in front of his sleek car. Nothing was better to drive bodyguards away than an embarrassing fight between lovebirds. Her bodyguards pretended not to pay attention to the fight, obviously embarrassed by the scene. Well-trained dogs, all of them. I slid my silver knuckle duster on in case Marcella's fiancé put up more of a fight than he looked. "Closer," I said to Gunnar, who steered the car toward Marcella. She looked furious. Cheeks flushed, looking absolutely striking against her porcelain skin. "Fucking Snow White," I muttered. The Marcella from my dreams had a remarkable similarity to the angry Marcella of the present, only that her flushed cheeks had a very different reason then. Gunnar gave me a curious look, but I ignored him. Marcella shoved her fiancé's shoulder and turned on her heel, so her hair hit him smack in the face. After a gobsmacked expression, he grabbed her arm and her bodyguards were all eyes now. We only had one chance. Soon they'd be swarming around the princess again, and we'd have no chance to get near her. I shoved the door open before Gunnar had come to a stop and jumped out of the car. I stormed toward Marcella with complete tunnel vision. Her eyes hit me and her face transformed from confusion to realization, then shock. Those plump lips parted for a cry. Her bodyguards began running, pulling their guns. Gunnar jumped out of the car, raised his pump gun, and fired. The sound transformed the peaceful campus into a hellhole. Screams sounded and people scattered, running for their lives. Their panic was to our advantage. They stumbled into Marcella's bodyguards who tried to reach us, slowing them down. I reached Marcella and her fiancé. He grabbed his gun, but I was faster and slammed my fist with the knuckle duster into his face. Blood shot out of his nose and mouth, and he toppled to the ground. I didn't have time to off him, not with all hell breaking loose. It was only a matter of minutes before dozens of Familia soldiers would enter the scene to protect their princess. I knew what would happen if they got their hands on me. They'd deliver me to Vitiello, and what he'd done to my father would look like kids' play in comparison to what he'd do to me for attacking his precious offspring. Not going to happen. Nothing mattered as I finally grabbed Marcella's arm and jerked her toward me. Her wide, shocked blue eyes hit me like a sledgehammer. Her eyes locked on mine, not afraid, only surprised. The blue of her irises were accentuated by a darker outer ring. The momentum had thrust her against my chest. A cloud of her exotic perfume, something subtly sweet but also spicy, hit me. She was even shorter than I thought. Even with high heels, she only reached my nose. Before she could react, I pressed the chloroform-drenched tissue over her mouth. Her eyelids drooped and she sagged against me. I hoisted her over my shoulder and ran toward the van. Gunnar was still firing at the bodyguards who didn't have a choice but to seek cover, even if their fear of Vitiello's wrath made them reckless. I put Marcella down on the loading area of the van before I closed the door and slid into the passenger seat. After a signal from me, Gunnar jumped in and hit the gas. I got one of them. He held out the pump gun and I took it in case I'd have to deal with pursuers. Soon, the campus disappeared in the distance, and Gunnar steered the car into a parking garage where we switched cars for the first time. The new van with the laundry logo belonged to a family member of one of the old ladies. I doubted Earl had told them what we'd use it for. He didn't care if Vitiello got his hands on them, as long as our plan worked out. Unimportant collateral damage. Marcella didn't stir when I carried her from one car to the other. After 30 more minutes, when I was fairly sure that we weren't being followed, I set the pump gun down onto the floorboard. Snow White was slowly coming to, groaning and moaning in a way that reminded me of last night's dream. I twisted around in the seat to watch her. The dose I'd hit her with hadn't been very potent. Her black lashes fluttered against her pale skin. I'd been almost 100% sure that her photos had been photoshopped heavily. But now, from close-up, I realized Marcella Vitiello was every bit as immaculately gorgeous as her Instagram and press photos had suggested. I had to resist the urge to move even closer, to touch her and find out if her skin felt as smooth as it looked. The short moment I'd grabbed her had been over in a flash, and I hadn't had time to pay attention. Her eyelids shot up and she looked at me, piercing and unafraid. I froze, stunned by the intensity of her gaze, by the way it grabbed hold of me and wouldn't let go. Luckily, the moment was over quickly. Her eyes rolled back and closed, and I stifled a sigh of relief to be freed of her penetrating stare. Fuck. We changed cars 2 more times before we reached our new clubhouse out in the woods northeast of Morristown. My heart rate began to slow when we drove through the wire netting fence gates. I'd half expected Vitiello and his soldiers to launch an attack on us. By now, Marcella was wiggling, still out of it, but growing increasingly more alert. This time, I didn't make the mistake of looking at her again. Earl waited on the porch of the old farmhouse, arms crossed. He'd received my message about our successful abduction. I jumped out of the van with a thumbs up in Earl's direction and opened the door of the loading area. Marcella sat up, supporting herself with one arm. She tossed her head back to glare at me when I towered over her. "Time to move into your temporary home, Miss Vitiello." I bent down to pick her up, but she scurried backward. "Don't touch me with your dirty hands." She aimed a kick at my crotch, but I grabbed her ankle before she could do real damage and jerked her in my direction. She didn't have any fight experience, so I had no trouble hoisting her out of the transporter. My attempt to set her down on the ground so she could walk by herself was thwarted when she aimed another kick at my shin. "Fuck it, bitch." Her indignant blue eyes hit me. Nobody had probably ever called her bitch before, and it wasn't usually a term I threw around, but she really pissed me off. "Walk, or I'll carry you over my shoulder so my brothers can see your perky ass." She stiffened, which gave me the chance to actually put her down on her feet and grab her arm to drag her along. Marcella struggled against my hold, but I only tightened my fingers around her upper arm, snarling. "Stop it." She flinched before her mouth set in a thin, stubborn line, but at least she finally followed me without a fight. Earl came down the 3 steps of the porch and met us halfway. "Nobody followed you?" Earl asked, scanning Marcella from head to toe. She shuddered. I wasn't sure if it was because of Earl or because she finally knew who we were. Unlike Gunner and me, Earl wore his cut with the big Tartarus MC script on the back and smaller on the front. "Nobody, don't worry. We were careful," I said. I moved toward the house, but Earl raised his hand to stop me. "The kennels," Earl ordered with a sharp nod in the direction of the line of cages down the slope from the house. I hesitated, my brows pulling together. Earl's eyes sharpened in warning. "Show the whore her rightful place." Marcella tensed, but when I started dragging her toward the kennels, fight returned to her body. Eventually, I had enough and hoisted her up on my shoulder as I'd promised. She was a lightweight, but what she lacked in weight, she made up with litheness and bite. She tried to scratch my neck and arms, every inch of skin that wasn't covered by clothes.
"You're going to regret this. My father will kill you."
Bearing the sting of her nails stoically, I muttered, "I'm sure he'd love to dismember me, but I won't give him a chance." Barking welcomed us as we reached the kennels. They were one of the new additions to the property. Earl never went anywhere without a few of his fight dogs.
"Oh, God,"
Marcella whispered. Maybe she thought I hadn't heard her. It certainly hadn't been meant for my ears, but for the first time, I sensed her fear and felt it in the tremor of her body. It was strange, but I didn't feel any satisfaction at her distress. I carried her into the only vacant kennel despite her struggling. Rottweilers filled the other cages, beasts that my uncle had turned into vicious fighting machines that only obeyed him, and sometimes me. Their barks and snarls rose in volume at the sight of a stranger. I dropped her unceremoniously on her feet, then turned and threw the cage door shut. The dogs sandwiching her kennel jumped against the bars, snarling and spit flying, as their vicious eyes fixated on Marcella, eager to tear into her. Earl earned good money with dogfights, but rumor had it that he disposed of traitors that way in the past, too. But that had been before my time. Marcella flinched and backed against the wall of the dog kennel, clutching one of her expensive-looking black high heels. Earl watched everything with a satisfied smile before he strolled over to me. For some reason, seeing her in a cage gave me the same uncomfortable sensation I'd experienced whenever I'd seen a tiger in the zoo. She didn't belong in there. But this wasn't about my unreasonable feelings, but about revenge. Her discomfort would be short-lived, and nothing in comparison to the hell I'd lived after her father had butchered mine. "Down," he hissed, and the dogs in all the kennels laid down obediently. He stopped beside me, but only had eyes for the girl inside the cage. "Marcella Vitiello, finally we meet."
"Am I supposed to know who you are?"
she said haughtily. I had a feeling she knew very well who we were. Her reaction to seeing the cut had been too strong. She couldn't be that oblivious. Though I was sure Vitiello did his best to turn her life into a fucking fairy tale. Yet even her shopping-fixated princess brain had to know the stories about our club and the Familia. "Maybe you don't," Earl said with a shrug. He turned, showing her the logo of the Hellbound with our script. "I'm the president of the Tartarus MC, and we have to settle a score with your father. Unfortunately for you, we intend to settle it with your help." Marcella crossed her arms.
"I won't help you settle anything. Your plan is doomed. My father will butcher all of you like he should have done a long time ago."
Not blind to what had happened, obviously. Suddenly seeing her in the cage didn't bother me quite as much anymore. Maybe it would do her good to sleep with the dogs for a while. "Let's see how long you can keep up that arrogance. Enjoy our hospitality," he said with a throaty chuckle. With a nod at me, he turned and headed back to the building. Marcella didn't move. She still brandished that one shoe in her hand. Her feet were bare, so she must have lost one shoe along the way. "You won't need fancy shoes around here, trust me," I said, leaning against the bars. She glanced at her high heel, then back at me.
"I don't trust you or any of the other hillbillies."
"Hillbillies?" I smirked and calmly took a cigarette from the package in my jeans. Not a very clever thing to insult the people responsible for your safety. I lit up the cigarette, never taking my eyes off the girl. Even her feet were immaculate. Her toes were painted red, probably by some fancy beauty salon in Manhattan. Girls like her didn't do their own nails or hair or anything else. They were used to having people do everything for them, spoiled to the very core. I finally tore my eyes away from her feet, not wanting to look like some pervert who was into sucking toes. Marcella was watching me like I had been watching her. Her face was a mask of control, but her eyes couldn't hide her fear. It didn't give me the amount of satisfaction I'd hoped for. Her father was who I wanted in my hands.
I don't even know your name,
Marcella said as if formal introductions could be expected. Maddox. Mad Dog White. I watched her reaction to my name, especially my nickname, closely. If she recognized the name, she didn't show it, but my middle name definitely caught her attention.
Mad Dog,
she said, shaking her head with a bitter smile. She flicked her manicured fingers in the direction of the dogs.
So they are yours?
I scoffed. You think they call me Mad Dog because I'm mad about dogs?
How would I know about biker etiquette, if there even exists any kind of etiquette among your kind?
I gritted my teeth. Mad Dog, because I know no fear like a mad dog.
Then you've never met my father.
I laughed quietly, shaking my head as I shoved the toe of my black boots into the dirt. If only she knew. She tilted her head in curiosity, but I had no intention of telling her more right now.
Why am I here?
She asked almost haughtily. I had to admit she surprised me. I'd have thought she'd be begging and crying by now, but so far, she kept up the cold mask she was notorious for. Maybe Marcella had more of her father in her than my uncle and I thought. Like my uncle said, because of your father and the score we want to settle. She shook her head.
Whatever you want from him, you won't get it.
We want his life, and I'm sure we'll get it considering we have his precious daughter. Marcella glanced over to the kennel on her left where Satan, Earl's favorite dog, sat behind the bars and watched her like her next treat. I'd never understood why he called a female dog Satan, but understanding Earl's reasoning was wasted time anyway. She swallowed and dragged her eyes back to me.
My father is the cruelest man you'll ever have the misfortune of meeting. The only thing he cares about is the familia.
I chuckled. You really think I believe that? Your father is good at keeping up his cold bastard face in public, but you and your mother look at him with love. If he was an asshole to you behind closed doors, you wouldn't look at him like that. I'd spent hours looking at photos of Luca with his family in the last few weeks. The internet was full of official portraits, few of which conveyed any honest emotion, but a few unwanted paparazzi photos had revealed Marcella's and Aria's feelings toward the man I hated more than anything. By some miracle, they seemed to adore him, and while he always kept his cold bastard facade up in public, I had a feeling he was at the very least protective and possessive of his daughter and wife. He would act now that we had her. Marcella shrugged, trying to appear blasé, but she dug her red-painted nails into her upper arms.
If you say so. Many victims love and admire their abusers.
I took a drag from my cigarette. Some do, but it is always mixed with fear. Fear of displeasing their abuser and being at the receiving end of their wrath.
How would you know? She said sharply. Did you major in psychology?
I gave her a tight smile. She didn't need to know more about my past than the story about my father's death. Nah, unlike you, I wasn't given the privilege of going to college.
It can't be about money. I bet your club makes plenty of money with drugs and guns. It is a lucrative business.
I'm surprised you know more about money than the price tag on your fancy shoes.
I never look at price tags,
she said dryly, giving a delicate one-shoulder shrug. I actually laughed. She had bite. I liked that. I'd expected something else. So your daddy shares his business stories with you? Maybe Marcella could actually be useful as more than bargaining material. Earl was keen on expanding our business, but the Familia had a tight grip on drugs and guns. No, he doesn't. That's something everyone with a bit of brain knows. I couldn't tell if she was lying. She had a good poker face, and she was definitely too confident for her own good. As the silence between us extended, she looked around her cell cautiously. In case you're looking for the toilet, it's over there. I pointed at the rusty bucket in the corner. I won't use a bucket, she said in disgust. Then you can just let it go on the floor like the dogs do. She looked over to the cage on her left again where Satan was now lying in her kennel, keeping a close eye on Marcella. The roar of several bikes told me the celebrations of a successful kidnapping would soon begin. With cheers and hoots, several of my club brothers made their way over to the kennels. They clapped my shoulders and checked out the captive with leery eyes and dirty comments. After a few minutes, and which Marcella seemed to have tried to disappear into the wall, they left for the clubhouse. Marcella gripped her forearms even tighter, glimpsing at me. So what now? I tossed my cigarette on the ground. You stay here and get comfortable, and I'll go to my brother's. Loud country music blasted through the open windows, and a few guys were singing along out of tune. They must have found the moonshine already. The door of the clubhouse burst open, and Gunner stumbled out, his shirt half unbuttoned and a bottle of moonshine in his hands. Maddox, you're missing the party, he shouted. I'm coming. I suppose you're celebrating my kidnapping? Marcella asked, tugging a strand of hair behind her ear. Today was the first time I saw her hair not perfectly straightened. That, and your father's upcoming painful death once he hands himself over for you. Marcella surprised me when she pushed away from the wall and came closer. I narrowed my eyes and straightened from the bars. She was a petite woman, a head shorter than me, but sometimes appearances were deceiving. The smile she sent me was ice cold. Enjoy the party while it lasts, but don't make a mistake. The only death you're celebrating is your own. Gray arrived on his bike at that moment. Finally, Gray, move your ass over here. Your old man has been looking for you all day, Gunner shouted. Gray gave me a nod as he got off his bike. I shook my head, wondering what he'd been up to again. His eyes settled on Marcella and he grimaced. His sentiments toward the kidnapping hadn't changed. Mine hadn't really either, but sacrifices had to be made if we wanted our well-deserved revenge. Gunner slung an arm around his shoulders and steered him toward the clubhouse, even if Gray looked as if he'd rather spend the evening at the kennels with me. Marcella's gaze darted from them to me. Your brother? I tilted my head, realizing she was watching everything closely. I wasn't sure how she knew we were related. We both had blonde hair, but Gray had our mom's gray eyes and his face was softer than mine. Half-brother, I said. She nodded, as if she was filing away the information for later use. I lit another cigarette and tipped an imaginary hat before I strode over to the clubhouse. Enjoy the fresh air. She didn't say anything, but I could almost feel her furious eyes on my neck. Inside the clubhouse, the party was in full swing. Word about the success of the mission had spread quickly. Everyone wanted to clap my shoulder and congratulate me on my success. I only shook my head with a grin. Earl came toward me and handed me a Budweiser. Why aren't you celebrating? It's too soon, I shouted in his ear. We've won a battle, but not the war. It's an important battle, son.
Let our men celebrate and give them the feeling we're close to winning the fucking war.
I nodded, then took a swig from the beer before I allowed Cherry, one of the newer club girls, to rub herself against me in a very explicit dance. My mind was elsewhere. I couldn't stop thinking about the girl locked in the kennel outside. She had been a figment of my imagination for so long that having her this close was a shock to my system. The moment I'd finished the beer, Gray shoved a bottle of moonshine into my hand. I took a small sip, then put it down on the bar. I preferred to stay sober with Marcella in our hands. I wouldn't underestimate Luca Vitiello. The man was a homicidal maniac with an army of loyal soldiers at his hands, and he was deadly protective of his family. Kidnapping his daughter could be the nail in all of our coffins if we didn't play this right. Earl should have postponed the celebrations, even if our brothers wouldn't have liked it. Alcohol and pussy could wait until Vitiello was dead. Cherry pressed up to me.
You look bored. Let's go up to your room. I know how to entertain you.
I let her pull me up the stairs and into my small room. The only piece of furniture was a bed and an armchair that I used to throw my clothes over. She shoved me on the bed and began to strip. I'd always been satisfied with the girls in the club, but now I couldn't stop comparing them to Marcella fucking Vitiello. And fuck me, Snow White played in a league of her own. Cherry dropped her bra, but that wasn't why my cock erected a tent in my jeans. An image of cold blue eyes, black hair, and plump red lips lingered in my head. I needed to stop fantasizing about Snow White, especially now that she was in reach.
Chapter 6. Marcella. I watched Maddox disappear inside the shabby farm building, a confident swagger to his gait. His biker buddies probably hailed him like a king after he kidnapped me. I moved toward the cage, trying to ignore the disapproving snarl of the dog in the cage beside mine, and my quickening pulse in response. It must have rained not too long ago because the stench of wet fur and pee made my stomach churn violently. The humidity and lingering heat only made things worse. I tried not to think of all the things my bare feet came into contact with on the dirty ground. I climbed on the hut, wincing as splinters from the rough wood speared my palms and pressed against the rough stone of the back wall. It was growing dark around me, only making my situation seem more desperate. Out of habit, I reached into my back pocket for my phone, but of course they'd disposed of it. Dad had always warned me about the dangers of our life, but neither he nor I had ever thought it would really come to this, that I'd actually be kidnapped. I shuddered. It still seemed like a nightmare. I didn't know what time it was. I must have lost my watch like one of my shoes in my struggle, but hours must have passed since I'd been kidnapped. The idea that I'd been passed out for hours, perhaps, sent an icy shiver down my back, wondering what these animals had done in the meantime. By now, Dad would know. I wondered if he'd told Mom yet. He preferred to keep certain dark topics from her and me, but we weren't stupid and knew more than he thought. Still, I wish there was a way to keep this news from Mom. She'd break down if she found out. Mom had never been built for this world. And Amo? He'd probably do something absolutely stupid, even more stupid than his usual actions. I smiled, but soon tears filled my eyes. I blinked fast to push them back. I wouldn't cry. Instead, I stared stubbornly ahead into the forest that surrounded the area, listening for sounds of a nearby road or human life. But apart from the occasional bird saying farewell to the sinking sun and the rustling of trees, I didn't catch anything, except for the ruckus from the clubhouse. Night fell and the bird's song died away. The howls from the biker party increased in volume, and were joined by the sound of breaking glass on occasion. Exhaustion, more emotional than psychological but just as potent, took hold of me. Yet, I wouldn't fall asleep until my body couldn't take any more. Not with these animals. Dogs and bikers alike, so close. Pebbles crunched. I tensed, and sat up as a man in his 20s stumbled in my direction. He was drunk, and couldn't even walk straight, but had his gaze fixed on me. He collided with the bars, then clung to them, his forehead pressing into the gap as if he wanted to squeeze through the metal. My eyes darted to the door, which was locked, but what if he had the keys? He gave me a wide grin. There she is. He sounded as if he was trying to be a snake, dragging the S grotesquely. Pretty princess. He undressed me with greedy, hooded eyes. My hand shook even worse, and so I clung to my knees. His eyes darted to the cage door. I prayed he didn't have the keys. Maybe he was drunk enough so I could overwhelm him and get away, but maybe he wasn't. And he was definitely stronger than me. He stumbled toward the door and rattled it, lightly at first, then harder. I breathed a sigh of relief when his angry shaking at the door didn't do anything. Pity, maybe later, he said with a stupid cackle. Then he began to unbuckle his belt. It took him 2 tries to get the fly down, and I jerked my head away in disgust. Was he going to jack off right in front of me? But the sound of liquid hitting the side of the hut inside the cage echoed through the silence. A few warm drops hit my hands, and I let out a disgusted scream, pressing even closer to the wall. You animal! Steps rang out. Denver, you asshole! Maddox roared and shoved the other man's chest so hard he toppled over and laughed drunkenly, then fell silent. Maddox was in his baggy jeans but without a shirt, and his bootlaces dragged over the ground. In the soft glow from the porch, I could see that he had several tattoos on his chest. One of them over his sternum, a skull spitting fire. The shadows accentuated the ridges of his muscled stomach right down to the V of his hips. Fuck, Maddox growled, and kicked an unmoving Denver whose head lolled to the side. The asshole passed out and pissed all over himself. He turned to me, eyes crinkling. Are you all right? Why do you care? You locked me in a dog cage. My voice had become nasal as I fought tears. I held my hand away from me, wondering how I could get rid of the pee. My stomach lurched just thinking about it. I don't, he said coldly and turned to go. Good night. He peed against the cage and I got some of it on my hands. I rushed to say, hating the desperate note to my voice. I was never desperate. At least not in front of strangers. Stupid asshole. Maddox growled in the direction of his biker buddy, who definitely didn't hear him before he said to me, I'll get you a towel. He turned and stalked up the pebbled way leading to the clubhouse.